Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where I talk about the Constitution, history, politics, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube.com/Annette Talks, and iHeartRadio. I am Annette Bybee. All right, today I'm going to talk to you about two things. Number one, why you should not fear the government and the media. And number two, why it's time to stop being afraid of COVID-19. All right, so the first part of my my podcast comes from this book, Feardom by Connor Boyack. I tried to get Connor on. He's been on a few times before, but he's super duper busy. So I decided I would just go ahead and do it without him. The book is excellent. I highly recommend it. I will link to it in the show notes. I got this on Amazon. It's easy to find. Feardom. Get it? Feardom, not freedom. And the second part of my podcast episode will come from this article I'm going to link to in the show notes as well, called Lockdown Lunacy 3.0. It's over. And it's a fabulous, fabulous blog post. I shared it on Facebook, maybe a week ago. And I've been studying it ever since then. So let's start out with why we shouldn't be afraid. I've got some quotes for you here. Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. H.L. Mencken, that quote is by John Barnhill. Here's one from H.L. Mencken. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. Rahm Emanuel, you know this one. You don't ever want a crisis to go to waste. The rest of it is, it's an opportunity to do important things that you would otherwise avoid. John Adams, fear is the foundation of most governments. Edmund Burke, no passion so effectually rules the mind of all its power of acting and reasoning as fear. So what we can see here is that the government thrives on fear. And the more fear you have, the more willing you are to give them power. And the more power you give them, the more power they're going to wield and not give up. Doctrine and Covenants 121, verse 39. We have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, and I would add women, as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's Lord Acton. So the government wants power. They thrive on power, fear, and they get power through fear. So the more afraid they can make you, the more power they can take. And the more power they get, the more power they'll use and hold on to. Because government never gives up power once it's taken it. But we are complicit in that when we allow it. You can see right now with what's going on with COVID-19. I'm going to use this as an example because this is what the problem is. So speaking of someone getting a little power and abusing it, all you need to do is look at the various governors of the states and what they're doing. I'm in Colorado. My governor is Jared Polis. We call him King Polis here, because as soon as this the COVID thing started rolling out, so did the lockdowns. Mayor Hancock of Denver was right up there. The health department was right there, but we got locked down. We had total arbitrary use of power, liquor stores and pot dispensaries were essential, so they could stay open, but churches could not. So there's no rhyme or reason to that, right? Except that one of the reasons was when they announced that they were shutting everything down, including liquor stores, people started lining up around the block. Oh no, together, to get their liquor. And so they saw that wasn't going to work. So they immediately changed that. And so But a lot of us churchgoers, I guess, didn't make enough of a fuss because they locked down the churches. And then Governor Polis started seeing enemies of the state. We were, to quote him, selfish bastards if we weren't wearing masks. So for our own protection and our own good, he made a mandatory emergency order, executive order banning masks. So for 30 days, masks were banned. Do you think after those 30 days were up, he said, no, that we can stop wearing them? No, of course not. Other things that he did, he changed the last call, because the next enemy was these darn 21-year-olds out there going to bars and partying and grouping together and partying. So last call had to be changed to 10 p.m. because 10:01 was dangerous. 9:59 safe. 10 p.m. That was the cutoff. So he let that go for, I don't know, a few weeks, and then he decided, okay, I guess 11 p.m. will be safer. So this is a man who's in love with his power. And restrictions are still here as far as masks on all indoor public activities, and social distancing at the store, of course. But yeah, our churches are still have several restrictions on them, including social distancing, the number of people you can have, and masks have to be worn. So, we've got all sorts of arbitrary restrictions that prove, and it's not even the worst here in Colorado. It's much worse in California, where they have many, many more lockdowns on them, even though their death rate was much lower than New York. We'll get to more of that later. But Michigan, look at the governor there. She arbitrarily locked down all sorts of things as well. And it didn't matter that the people pushed back. So these are just a few examples of governors who have gone power mad and are throwing lockdowns around and mandates around like candy. And unfortunately, state legislatures aren't doing much to stop them. We finally have one of our state senators or state rep, I don't know which, assembly member or state senator, who is suing the governor to overturn the mask mandate. We'll see where that, I don't know why it took this long. This should have been happening sooner. But so you see this happening right now with governors and health departments. And of course, it's trickled down to everything else, because now schools, our Douglas County School District has a hybrid program for elementary school. So our kids are going to school 2 days a week, staying home 3 days a week for online school. And when they're at school, they have to wear masks and social distance. And already I've had a little run-in with my daughter's middle school, because she came home and told me that in PE they were running around with masks on. Even the WHO says no exercising with masks. So some of these entities are taking it on themselves to do even more stringent restrictions than the WHO. And this is all despite all these studies that have said that children are not spreaders. Children don't spread them to each other. They don't get sick as much. They don't get as sick when they do get sick, and they don't spread it to adults as much. Doesn't matter. It's fear, people, fear. So not only is it that the politicians are feeding off of our fear, but then you see the people making it entirely possible. For instance, when I talked to the assistant principal about the problem that I had with my daughter wearing masks and how ridiculous it was, she says, well, of course, we're getting calls from parents saying, the kids aren't staying far enough away from each other and they're not wearing their masks enough. So we have people literally begging for more restrictions. I sat in on several virtual town halls for the county commissioners, where the county commissioners were trying to get variances from a lot of the restrictions from the governor. And there were people in the comments saying, no, we want the restrictions. Why don't we have a mask mandate yet? It's shocking to me how many people are saying they don't want the choice. They want government to keep us safe by restricting us. That's insane. I saw the same thing when I would watch these press conferences that the governor would do, which they're almost unwatchable because he loves hearing himself talk, and he loves to get out there and restrict us more. Every time he gets out there, you could just see how much he loves us. He's got a little mask on, and then he takes it off to talk, and then he puts it back on again to virtue signal. But when you're watching the press conferences and you watch the comments, people are on there. Thank you for keeping us safe, Governor, and people believe the science, and we want the mandates. So people are literally begging for more restrictions. They're begging for mandates. They're begging for lockdowns because they want the governor and government to keep us safe. So that's the problem. And so obviously I'm very frustrated because it's not just, I can complain all day long to the governor and to the county commissioners and to the health departments, to the mayors. But if I walk outside without a mask, or if I go to Target now, because now the retail outlets have all joined in and made their own little mask mandates. So if I want to go to the store without a mandate or without a mask on, I'm going to be jumped on by the store, or I'm going to be given the evil stink eye by other people. So this is the problem with fear. So as I've quoted already, Edmund Burke says, no passion so effectually rules the mind, robs the mind of all its power of acting or reasoning as fear. So people are taking fear and letting it crowd out logic. And they're also believing what they're told by mass media. So we have the government that loves fear, and we get that from the government through constant feeding us. First it was, for the first 2 weeks it was, we didn't know what was going to go on. We were all afraid, and so we were all locked down, and we were all waiting, and we were seeing all these deaths reported, and then it was hospitalizations, and now that we're on the decline, it's new cases. And so the government's talking about new cases all the time. If you don't believe me that they want that power, or they want to restrict us, one of the things that Biden is saying in his part of his campaign is that if his advisors tell him to, he will lock down the country and will have a national mandatory mask mandate. Who cares if that's totally unconstitutional? The states have the police power. The federal government does not have the police power. It's funny to hear people talking about, oh, the president should be doing this, the president should be doing that. No, he shouldn't be doing it. And I'm glad that he isn't, because he knows that he doesn't have the power. It rests in the states. So anyway, Biden wants to lock everybody down, and he wants to force masks onto everybody. That tells you that there's a big portion of this country that wants that, and they are probably happy with Biden because he's saying that. That's right. You force everyone to wear a mask. You force us to be safe. All right. So what we're seeing is, if you're just watching the news, you're just getting sound bites, or if you're watching press conferences, you're getting new cases from the government and the press. So we know that the government has its reason to manipulate us to being fearful, because as long as we're fearful, we'll continue to give up our power. Keep us safe. And then the media wants more clicks, right? So if you stay afraid, and if you will stay locked on to the narrative, and you'll keep checking back again and again and again, how much fear should I be in today? Because they're going to keep telling you new cases. So what can we do? Well, if you don't believe me, look for patterns of abuse of power, first of all, that we just talked about, conflicts of interest, and track records of public deception. So have we been deceived by our government? Have we been deceived by media in the past? Heck yeah. Just look at what they've been feeding us. At first it was, they're going to have 20 million deaths, right? That's what Governor Newsom was saying. Look for 20 million deaths, all right? And that was just in his state. We are nowhere near that. There's less than 1 million around the whole world. And we'll get to more of that as I get into COVID-specific information. But Voltaire said, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. So right now, we're being fed absurdities. Like, 20 million people were going to die. All right, so we need to be skeptical. We need to choose to seek out reputable sources of information with established records of accuracy and integrity. Trust but verify, like Reagan said. We must choose to constantly be suspicious that our fears may be triggered not through personal experience and verifiable evidence, but through claims made to us regarding dangers we cannot see. And that's from page 37 of the Feardom book that I'm taking most of this information from. And that brings me to another point. You know, I've been looking around and I keep wondering, why are so many people running afraid still in August, the end of August? This thing's been going since March. I can see being afraid at the beginning in the first 2 weeks when we didn't know what was going on and we saw all these deaths happening in Italy and New York. But here we are in August and we're not seeing it. I don't know why people are buying into the fears that they are, why they're still remembering the fear that they had back in March instead of, or looking at these new cases and conflating that into fear instead of looking around at their own personal experience. For example, I still do not personally know anyone who has died of the virus. I know one lady who was hospitalized, came really close, fortunately did not die. She was in an earlier episode if you want to go look that up. I still don't know anyone who's died. I know many people who got sick and it was mild. They had mild symptoms. But I still don't know anyone who's died. If this thing was so bad, I would know people who have died. My Facebook feed would be full of stories about people who, you know, oh, my cousin just died, my sister, my brother. It just never happened. And I talked to other people too. Same thing. Nobody's telling me all these people have died. I have all these relatives and friends who have died. It never materialized. So I don't know why people are not trusting their own personal experience. So you need to look at your personal experience first, and then you need to start questioning. I have another great quote I have to throw in here. Norman Vincent Peale, you gotta love this guy. Once we roared like lions for liberty, now we bleat like sheep for security. I want you to remember that. We used to roar like lions for liberty. Now we bleat like sheep for security. Please keep me safe, keep me safe. Oh, Andrew Napolitano. And this quote was from several years ago, dealing with post 9/11 and the Patriot Act. If you want to see another way that government's able to push fear to push an agenda, they use fear to push an agenda. Oh, also while I'm there, the CARES Act. Did you know that was originally written in 2019? It was a $1 trillion bill it was introduced in January 2019, sat around the House for a year because they knew they couldn't get it passed. But then, COVID hits. In March, it's rewritten, another $1 trillion is added to it, and it's up to $2.2 trillion, renamed CARES, Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, signed in March of 20. And so voila, you have something that was sitting around for a year, not getting any traction. Let a crisis come along. Don't let that crisis go to waste. Throw a bunch more money into it, and then you can pass it. So people are afraid enough they'll just swallow just about anything, even if it's $2.2 trillion. And that wasn't all. We spent like $4 trillion because people were afraid. Because fearful people seek security over liberty. They want to be kept safe at almost any expense. $4 trillion. Lockdowns right and left. The loss of our freedom to assemble. The loss of our freedom of religion. So Andrew Napolitano says, our present government has made every attempt to thwart our right to due process using claims of national security and state secrets to mask the use of truly dictatorial powers and procedures profoundly contrary to national law. And so this, I would change this wording a little bit and say our present state governments are using fear to mask dictatorial powers and procedures contrary to state law. So fear of the virus has let so many things happen. Trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt because it's money that we don't have, or inflation because we've had to print money that we don't have. liberties eroded, lockdowns. How many people lost their businesses? How many people lost the right to go to the stinking park with their kids? I mean, we let so many things happen, and we are still letting it happen. In August, today is August 29th. This thing's been going on since March. But we're still letting things happen. We're still masking up. We're still being bullied by mask bullies. We're still being bullied, even though it's obviously come down and I'm going to get to that next. So anyway, it's not just obviously this COVID thing that's been around. I mentioned just one other example, the Patriot Act. Now we're spied on 24/7 by our own government. But take any big crisis, and the government will use fear to take away our liberties and expand government. So where fear is big, government gets big. If we can bring our fear down, we can bring government down, okay? But we can't have both, people. All right, so what can we do to combat fear? Recognize that the traditional media has been compromised. You can see that there's obviously an agenda. Watch any mainstream media and you can see there's an agenda there. Plus, so many of them do not want to lose their jobs, do not want to lose their sources within government. So they're not going to say anything that does not fit within that agenda, whether it's on the right or the left. There's an agenda. So mainstream media has been compromised. So seek out people who are challenging the narrative. The ones that are being attacked by the establishment, they are the ones that are probably onto something. Have confidence that you can determine and understand the truth. I look around, I talk to people, I can see what's going on. I don't need to go to mainstream media and believe their sound bites. Set aside your partisan preferences and any interfering loyalties. Just because you've been fed something by your party doesn't mean it's true. All right? Go and do the homework for yourself. Investigate for yourself. Go and look around, do your own investigations, go to all sorts of sources, be open to something besides what the mainstream media or the government is feeding you. A ship, I have to assume the risk, okay? Know that life is risk, people. A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. That's John Shedd, an American author. We are not built to sit in the harbor being afraid. See risk for what it really is and not for what others who don't have our best interests, including our liberty, at heart. That's also from the Feardom book. See others as people, in this case, others as people and not as virus spreaders. And in this case, stop seeing the virus as the only thing. I am much, much, much more worried about losing my liberties than I am about a virus. All right. And I'm willing to risk for freedom. All right. And one of the quotes in here that I wanted to share about dangerous liberty. Liberty is dangerous. It is. But it's liberty. Would you rather have a safe, I don't know, say Hitler? Would you rather have Hitler keeping you safe, or Mussolini keeping you safe, or Jared Polis keeping you safe by keeping you down? Or would you rather get out there and have freedom and a little bit of danger? This is attributed to Ferdinand Magellan. The sea is dangerous and its storms terrible, but these obstacles have never been sufficient reason to remain ashore. Unlike the mediocre, intrepid spirits seek victory over those things that seem impossible. It is with an iron will that they embark on the most daring of all endeavors to meet the shadowy future without fear and conquer the unknown. So hey, let's get out there and conquer the unknown. So fear keeps us at the mercy of government. We don't want that. So let's resolve to do away with the fear by seeking out information. Information is power, unlike what 1984 will tell you. More information you have, the more powerful you feel. And the more powerful you feel, the less fear you will have. So if you're starting to feel fear, question it. Where is that coming from? Is someone trying to manipulate me? Why? What does the government have to gain by keeping me afraid? Oh, maybe by keeping me in line, going along with whatever they want me to do. Why is the media trying to keep me feel fearful? Maybe they have the same agenda as the government, or maybe they want me to just keep coming back to them again and again. So recognize fear for what it is, question it, and then arm yourselves with knowledge. So you have knowledge is power. All right, now on to the second part of this podcast. Why specifically we do not need to be afraid of this virus anymore. Again, this came from, this is fabulous. When I saw this blog post by J.B. Handley, I was just thrilled because he lays out this fabulous case about why this thing is over with charts and graphs. And again, I will link to this in my show notes so you can look it up for yourself. Do the research for yourself. This guy has put it together in a nice little package, but he uses charts and graphs that he's gotten from the CDC and elsewhere, and from doctors and studies. This is not just him, talking. All right, so let's talk about why we don't need to fear this anything anymore. Oh, and it was funny that he talks about how this psychiatrist wonders why we are so freaked out. Or this is Jeffrey A. Tucker of the American Enterprise Institute for Economic Research. In his essay, When Will the Madness End? I'm a practicing psychiatrist who specializes in anxiety disorders, paranoid delusions, and irrational fear. Sound familiar? I've been treating this in individuals as a specialist. It's hard enough to contain these problems in normal times. What's happening now is a spread of this serious medical condition to the whole population. It can happen with anything, but here we see a primal fear of disease turning into mass panic. It seems almost deliberate. It is tragic. Once this starts, it could take years to repair the psychological damage. I think he's right. I think we're going to see people in masks for the rest of their lives. Not me, not my kids. My kids are wearing them to school to go along because they don't want to create a disturbance. They don't want to be disliked. They don't want to stand out from the crowd. This is one of the big problems with the masks. They are a highly visible form of conformity. If you're not wearing them, people can see it immediately and question, why are you not wearing that? You don't care, do you? So when the girls, and the thing is, they're being so trained at school and elsewhere to wear them constantly, even in church, which makes me sad. But they're being trained to wear them mindlessly. Like, we had sister missionaries over for dinner the other night, and one of their rules is we have to keep these masks on unless we're eating. So we had to keep them on even at the table before we were starting to eat. One of my girls accidentally almost stuck a fork through her mask because they're being trained to not think about why they have them on and when they can take them off. If I have to wear one at Target and I walk into the bathroom and there's no one there, I take that puppy off because I want to keep remembering you don't have to keep this on when there's nobody around. There's no one to spread. There's no one to cough on, When I'm in the store, I'm in an aisle with no one else, that thing comes off. Because I want to remember myself to constantly be thinking and not just mindlessly wear the stupid thing. But at school, they're so conditioned to it that they're running around the track with the mask on. Because, they haven't been told they can take it off. That's the other problem. First of all, it's highly visible. In a free society, we should not have it's like wearing a gold star on our chest or a jade to say we're Jewish, whatever. Was it a star? I think it was the Star of David they had to wear. Or a little mask to show that we're conforming. That is not a good thing in a free society. But yeah, the other thing, we're not thinking about it. Just wearing it all the time. So, you go home and you're still wearing the mask. Why? Because you're just used to wearing it. That's why people are wearing them in their cars, driving around. Got to put the mask on, going to work. No one else in the car, but got the mask on. I hate it. Absolutely hate it. Anyway, so he talks about how young people don't even seem to realize that they're much less at risk. They've been so brainwashed that when they're asked in surveys about it, they think that, even young people think that they're way more at risk than they are. And says, this is Daniel Horowitz. He wrote an article, new study, millennials think the risk from COVID-19 is exponentially more than the true threat. He says, perhaps the most destructive element of lockdown is the panic and fear that such severe measures help confirm. In this case, wrongly so, in the minds of the young and impressionable. As the paper concludes, experience has shown that communities faced with epidemics or other adverse events respond best and with the least anxiety when the normal social functioning in the community is least disrupted. In other words, we need to flatten the fear. So one of our biggest fallouts from this whole thing, or side effects from this whole fear or this whole panic, is that people are going to be afraid, and they're going to be afraid for a long time. I feel bad for my girls because they're going to grow up remembering being afraid. Hopefully I'm counteracting that because I'm constantly talking to them about this, how they don't need to be afraid. They put their mask on, we get in the car, take that mask off. So there's a different survey asking Americans how many people they thought, okay, one of the questions, how many people in your country have died from coronavirus? Americans responded 9%, which would be roughly 3 million people. And the actual number at the time of the survey was 151,000. Way, way, way lower than 9%, or less than 1%. Anyway, so society's lost its mind. Younger people overestimate the risk of dying from COVID-19. Americans have wildly overestimated how many people have died from COVID-19 because of what I mentioned before. The press and the government were constantly feeding them negative information. Even now they hear new cases and they think new deaths and new hospitalizations, which is not the truth. All right, so he looks at in the IFR, the infection fatality rate, which is unlike the case fatality rate, because the infection fatality rate is the actual fatality rate of COVID-19. And so in order to get there, to forecast the IFR, you need 2 bits of data, total deaths and total people who have had the virus. The second data point is harder to find because so many people are asymptomatic. But the most reliable data he found is in the meta-analysis of by Stanford's Dr. John Ioannidis, entitled The Infection Fatality Rate of COVID-19. And he has a median IFR of 0.25%. So that's a quarter of 1%. Says it's hard to make this point strongly enough. A virus with an IFR this low would never, ever merit the response we've seen from health authorities and elected officials. The response we've seen from health authorities and elected officials of COVID-19's hardly a once-in-a-century pandemic, as some try to say. It's a strong flu bug, nothing more. And then they broke down the death rate by age. And what's interesting is 0 to 44 has a 0.01 infection fatality rate, which is the same as the automobile accident fatality rate. So if you're 0 to 44 years old, your chances of dying from COVID-19 are the same as getting in a car accident. And other accidental injury is actually higher, 0.03. So you're more likely to have some kind of an accident, whether a car or something else, than COVID-19. It goes up higher if you're 45 to 54, 55 to 64. Even at 55 to 64, you're still at less than half of 1%. 65 to 74, you jump up to 1.65%. 75 to 84, 5.72%. Over 85, you have 22.5% chance. So it gets higher as you get older. But still, your total, the entire population is 0.25%. All right, then the next good bit of news that people don't realize is the herd immunity threshold. Many people think it's 60 to 70%, but more and more people are starting to agree that it's really about 10 to 20%, because I will just quote his article. The conclusion that COVID-19's herd immunity threshold is between 10 to 20% is gaining wide acceptance, and it's being borne out in the real world as countries everywhere are watching deaths from COVID-19 simply dry up as the virus runs out of new people to infect. The obvious explanation for this is that our T cells carry immunity based on the fact that we've all been exposed to many coronaviruses, which is commonly called a cold. Says his favorite outspoken scientist on this issue is Oxford's Dr. Sunetra Gupta, who says, what I didn't anticipate was that some of our responses to previous exposures to seasonal coronaviruses, aka a cold, might actually protect us from infection. It's one thing to get infected and not ill, but what the new studies are showing is that people are actually fighting off infection. So at an even more basic level, the pre-existing antibodies or T cell responses against coronaviruses seem to protect against infection, not just the outcome of infection. So we only need 10 to 20% HIT or herd immunity threshold, not 60 to 70%, which is awesome. And it says, he further goes on to say, the author of the blog post, if you read one link in this whole blog post, I'd make it this interview with Dr. Gupta. It's wide-ranging, and she also explains how lockdowns not only don't work, but that countries and states that sealed themselves off, like New Zealand and Hawaii, are simply postponing their day of reckoning. Dr. Gupta and her team's new paper, The Impact of Host Resistance on Cumulative Mortality and the Threshold of Herd Immunity of SARS-CoV-2, explores the issue of HIT further. These results help to explain the large degree of regional variation observed in seroprevalence and cumulative deaths, and suggest that sufficient herd immunity may already be in place to substantially mitigate a potential second wave. In other words, the second wave that the government's trying to scare you with, it's not going to happen. Equally, seropositivity, or sero, I don't know how to pronounce that, positivity measures of 10 to 20% are entirely compatible with local levels of immunity having approached or even exceeded the HIT, in which case the risk and scale of resurgence is lower than currently perceived. Lockdowns don't work. Getting politicians involved in trying to fight the normal course of a viral illness will hopefully be seen by historians as one of the silliest things we ever chose to do. In simple terms, a virus is going to be a virus. Dr. Gupta explains, quote, the epidemic is an ecological relationship that we have to manage between ourselves and the virus. But instead, people are looking at it as a completely external thing, unquote. Said differently, like every other virus, COVID-19 is here to stay. Lockdowns provide politicians with an illusion of control, but the data is rolling in that they have been useless. And even The Lancet, one of the world's most prestigious medical journals, has weighed in. They have an article titled A Country-Level Analysis Measuring the Impact of Government Actions, Country Preparedness, and Socioeconomic Factors on COVID-19 Mortality and Related Health Outcomes. Their conclusions are pretty stark and depressing for those of us who have undergone lockdowns. Here's a quote from that study. Government actions such as border closures, full lockdowns, and a high rate of COVID-19 testing were not associated with statistically significant reductions in the number of critical cases or overall mortality. In other words, lockdowns don't work. They just haven't. German scientists look at the same topic just within the country of Germany and reach the same conclusion in this other paper. I'm just linked to go to this and look at this. This is what the other paper about Germany says. A trend change of infections from exponential growth to decay was not induced by the lockdown measures, but occurred earlier. So the growth occurred before the lockdowns, which you see in California as well. Additional impacts of later NPIs cannot be clearly detected. Firstly, there is no significant effect with respect to infections that could be attributed to school and daycare closures. Secondly, effects which could be related to the contact ban, i.e. being away from everybody else, do not appear with respect to all three indicators, differ in strength and tend towards lower impacts, and do not match the time the measure came into force. Thus, the necessity of the second, March 16th to 18th, and the third bundle of interventions, March 23rd, is questionable. In other words, there's no data that shows that lockdowns had any positive effect. All these American governors threatening to resume lockdowns? Yes, there's no science that supports anything they are threatening. And I might add Biden. Again, a virus is going to be a virus, which leads to the final piece of data, which he shows. All right, viruses go up and then down, and the death rate is the only reliable way to track them. So he goes on to this other William Farr's way out of the pandemic, which is a team at Oxford. They basically showed, there's all of these charts in here, but basically they all follow the same curve, right? All viruses follow a similar pattern, and that's the slope of the death curve on the way up will roughly equal the slope of the way on the way down, which means if you know when you have reached peak deaths, you have a very good idea of when the virus will be extinguished. As Farr wrote, the death rate is a fact. Anything beyond that is an inference. Once peak deaths have been reached, we should be working on the assumption that the infection has already started falling in the same progressive steps. Using deaths as the proxy for falling infections facilitates the planning of the next steps for reopening those societies that are in lockdown. So in other words, if you just look at death rates, if you see that we've reached peak, and then it starts coming down, you know that we're done. So he shows in this blog post, he shows the death rates, death curves from all over the world. And let's just start summarizing here. But one of the other things that he found is that there's a different death rates in terms of both timing and slopes depending on where in the world you live by latitude. Whether driven by solar radiation or vitamin D levels. This Hope Simpson study predicted exactly what happened in California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida in the last month. COVID-19 came later on a lower death curve to the U.S. states that sit at or below the 35th parallel. So he goes through and has several charts and graphs, which I'm not going to show you, but it's really striking that the death curves, I'm going to just show you a little bit if you're watching on YouTube, all of these different countries. This is the UK, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and Sweden. And if you're looking on YouTube, you can see that they all went up and they're all coming down, all the death rate, all the death curves. And then in U.S. northern states, they show the same thing. You can look on his blog post for these, but you see the death curves. Sorry, let me just take this off. U.S. northern states all went up and then came down. But then the southern states, because they're below the 35th parallel, they came later. So the southern latitude states came later, and he has more charts that I'm not going to go through. But one of the things that one of the cases he made was that Arizona and California basically did the same thing, even though California locked down. So California's lockdown isn't doing jack squat. So here he shows the deaths in Arizona. You can see the death curve came much later than in other states because it's below the 35th parallel. And here he shows the same thing in Texas. It just came much later. All right, and so this gets to the good news for the whole thing. And he's quoting Michael Levitt here. Says, that's the question you've been patient. He says, when will this be over in the United States? That's the question you've been patiently been waiting for. For me to answer, when will it be done in the United States? August 25th. So his guess is the 25th. That was a few days ago. Because he wrote this at the end of July. How do I know that? Well, I don't know with certainty, but it's the date that Stanford Nobel laureate Dr. Michael Levitt picked, and he's been right on China and Sweden, so I'm going with him. Let's explore this question and how it looks. The answer to this question. Michael Levitt tweeted, U.S. COVID will be done in 4 weeks with a total reported death below 170,000. How will we know it's over? Like for Europe, when all-cause excess deaths are at normal level for a week. Reported COVID-19 deaths may continue after 25th of August, and reported cases will, but it will be over. So what he's saying is August 25th is when the excess deaths from COVID have stopped for several weeks. And so then he has another chart. Total excess deaths in Europe in 2020 has not changed for 9 weeks. That's why still the number is large with 175,000 deaths since March 1st. So Europe, 175,000 deaths. And when he wrote this article, the U.S. was at 165,069 deaths, and that's his little chart where he shows the top line is total deaths in 2020, and the bottom line is the normal deaths. So when you look at that, if you look at the difference between 2020 and normal, as they come closer and closer, it shows you that COVID is done, because those are the excess deaths. The excess deaths between these two lines are mostly going to be COVID. And so going by that, then what he said, with when you see 170,000 deaths and excess deaths being near normal deaths, let me pull out one last chart for you, because I thought, well, let's look at today's numbers then. And when I went to the CDC, I found that, and I don't know why it's different on the CDC than you're seeing other places, but the CDC has us at 168,000 something. I can't find the exact number right now, but about 168,000 deaths. All right, and so this is, I got this today on the CDC, and this is the weekly number of deaths from all causes, okay? And then the number above the line is excess deaths. So this, the line, this yellow line shows where the usual number of deaths is. These blue parts show excess deaths. So basically, when this yellow line meets the blue line, we're at the norm again. All right, so now that was a really big, see the plus, the gold line indicates observed count above threshold. The blue is predicted number of deaths from all causes. So the gold line is the threshold for excess deaths. The gold line, anything above the gold line is excess deaths, all right? This right here is March. I'm gonna show you a smaller graph of the same thing. If you're not watching on YouTube, I suggest that you take a look at this on the blog post I'm gonna share. But what I wanna show you here, if you look up close, is that right here is right now. And the gold line is almost at that blue threshold, which means that our death rate right now is almost normal, meaning there's barely any excess deaths. We are barely over the gold line. If you look at the dates down here. So this was July, and it's just come down. So just like this guy predicted, this is us right here, barely above the average deaths that we would expect this year. And we're at about 168,000 deaths, which matches what that guy said about 170,000. If you don't believe me, if I didn't make a good enough case, go and look at this blog post. Look at all the charts for yourself. Look, the graphs tell the whole story. When you see the death curve, it's up, but now it's way down. You can't dispute that. The death curve is not going to come back up. They've been looking at viruses for decades. This is not some brand new. This is coronavirus. This is COVID-19. These have been around for a while. We didn't know how this thing was going to act. Now we do. It's over. So we don't need to be afraid. We don't need to have mask mandates. We don't need to lock down anything. We need to get on with our lives as normal. Our little ship needs to be out of the harbor and out facing the storm. We need to stop being afraid. We need to stop being afraid of COVID-19, and we need to stop accepting fear from our government and from the media. So if you start seeing yourself being afraid of the things that you're seeing on the news and what you hearing from the government, go through the little analysis that I mentioned earlier. Ask yourself what you're afraid of. Ask yourself if there's an agenda to what they're feeding you, and then go out and do some investigation of your own. Leave aside your partisan bias. Leave aside any other biases that you have. Go in with an open mind and look at several sources. Find some sources that are reliable, that have been true. I mean, this guy's, he's got doctors who've been looking at these things for decades. And all you have to do is look at the truth. The CDC numbers are not lying to you. Those are accurate. That's accurate right there. You're seeing that for yourself with your own two eyes, okay? So you don't need to worry about new cases, okay? New cases do not equal hospitalizations and deaths. Go look on your state's health board website. Go look at the CDC numbers. Look at new deaths. Look at new hospitalizations. Cases may be going up because they're doing a lot more testing, but hospitalizations and deaths are way down. You don't need to be afraid, people. I implore you. Look, I'm wearing my Faith over fear shirt. I implore you, be faithful. Embrace liberty. Embrace faith. Don't embrace fear. We can do this, guys. We're all in this together. And so let's not be fearful. Let's be faithful. Let's be logical. Let's think about things. Let's not see each other as virus spreaders. Let's see each other as friends, just like we always have. Friends, relatives, co-workers, classmates. We're not going to get sick by these people. And guess what? Even if you do get sick, odds are you're going to be just fine. All right. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with all that. Go check those sources. See for yourself. Do your investigation. But I implore you to go watch this YouTube video if you weren't watching. And check me out on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe, like, share, comment, all those great things. But thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.